Well, Ruby, thank you for the invitation to talk a little bit about the psychological side of human factors, which I think will complement very nicely what's been said in the last presentation on the physiological side, because clearly both are going to be important. So I'm going to talk about non-technical skills here. And if you're not familiar with this term, which has come from the world of aviation, what we're talking about are cognitive and teamwork skills, thinking skills, how people work together. And this is really all about error management. It's skills that help to catch errors, mitigate errors, cope with errors once they happen. It's called non-technical because they complement people's technical skills. And so this is all designed for people who are doing technical work in technical environments. It's a very key part of people's expertise. And the focus is on people's behavior. So it's not about personality, which might be something you look at in selection. That's not what we're looking at here. We're just looking at the behaviors that people choose to use at the work site. And it's important to emphasize that this is not team working in the sense of a very stable team who work together for months and months on end, maybe like a military team. This is much more like teams in aviation or in healthcare or in other settings where you're not quite sure which team you're going to be with on a given day because there are changes to the team. And the kind of training that's used in industry to teach these non-technical skills is called crew resource management. It's important to emphasize that we're not saying this is the only thing that contributes to job performance and safety. So I am wanting to acknowledge that there are a lot of other things in terms of how the organisation is run and managed, the professional culture that technicians or others bring into the organisation, the work conditions we've just heard in Liliana's presentation have a very significant effect on people's well-being as well as on their behaviour. So I'm just wanting to emphasize this is not a sort of blame the worker when things go wrong. It's just part of the whole system of factors that influence safety. If we look at non-technical skills for safety critical workplaces, such as the wind industry, what essentially you're building up here are agreed frameworks from people who are experienced in the tasks and have been doing this for some time. And we're trying to work out what are the desirable and the undesirable behaviours for safe and efficient work. The beauty of this is it starts to bring a common language into studying these aspects of the non-technical aspects of work, how people think about their tasks, how they work together. It's got lots of applications, selection, training, debriefing, etc. Also for accident analysis, you can see that being used in some reports. And what's maybe a bit different about this approach when it's done well is that it's underpinned by ongoing psychological research into safe behaviour for this particular work setting. Where does this come from? Ruby already mentioned this. I'll not go through it. The Tenerife accident. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. That's really one of the starting points here in aviation. So this has come from the world of aviation a good number of years ago. And more locally, if we come back to the UK, there were significant accidents that really, as it were, sped up or increased the emphasis by the regulator on bringing in this kind of work to identify the non-technical skills. This is for airline pilots. The Kegworth accident, you might remember, where the pilots had one engine on fire and then accidentally shut down the good engine with terrible results. And the regulators were very interested in the fact that these were not necessarily primarily a lack of technical skills. It was about how communication, teamwork, decision making was going on. That was the really, in a sense, the prime factor that was of interest. So what are these non-technical skills? There are categories of these. These are sort of broadly similar across work settings, although the behaviours are different because they do different tasks in different environments. We're talking about situation awareness, which is knowing where you are, now, as it were, in the task and what might happen in the future. So being able to think ahead, pick up information, make a picture of where you are and predict and anticipate what might happen next. Decision making, teamwork, leadership, communication, and also relevant to the previous presentations, how do you manage stress and fatigue? And so these are the main categories that are usually taught when you're delivering training around non-technical skills to build awareness of how these skills are relevant in the workplace. This is an example. We've been doing work on this for several decades. I got involved with this initially in a European project looking at airline pilots, non-technical skills, and a framework then was developed called, just to give you an idea of the sort of thing we're looking at, called NOTEX, non-technical skills for pilots. So you see these categories of skills, and then each category breaks down into a number of key elements, and for each element we would be asking experienced pilots to say, what does this behavior look like if it's good, if it's safe? What does this behavior look like if it might increase risk in their case in the flight deck? And we've just heard from Gemma about how do you use task analysis to look at the physiological side of work. Psychologists also use the same types of methods, I'll not go through them, to look at these non-technical skills. And much of this is about talking to people and getting information from experienced workforce. If you happen to have voice recorders like they do in the flight decks, that's very useful, but most workplaces don't have that, unfortunately, so we can't hear what they were talking about when things started to go wrong or when things were being handled very efficiently. I've mentioned that at best, this kind of approach is underpinned by ongoing research. And when you bring this into a new industry, because they have some accidents, some incidents, they know some of them are due to these factors, poor decision making, lack of communication, etc. At best, then they do a bit of work on the task analysis I've just heard about, maybe also looking at accident analysis and looking for these factors. And you, on the basis of that, identify the skills for your industry, the conditions under which they would apply. And on that basis, you design your training and hopefully evaluate that as it goes forward. What we see sometimes in industry is companies get interested in this non-technical skills approach and they just say, oh, okay, we'll get some airline pilots to come in and tell us about this, and then that will be us applying it in our workplace. And that just tends not to work very well. This has to be highly relevant to the workplace. It has to be in the language of the technicians, operators, whoever are doing the jobs. And so if you miss out these steps of doing the task analysis, you're probably not going to get a program of non-technical skills training that's really effective for your work settings. At the moment, this is a big deal in aviation. Airline pilots are not only regularly trained, so they have an early training course of maybe 2 or 3 days on this, and then they have recurrent training every year in their airlines on some aspect of non-technical skills. It's also in their licensing and assessment. And in most of the bigger airlines now, pilots could actually fail their license check only on non-technical skills. It's unusual for pilots to fail checks, but it's now become so important and significant that they place a lot of weight on this. And the current model that they're using in aviation, certainly this is from Europe, from the regulator, they are now blending together the technical and the non-technical skills. And you see the non-technical skills there in blue. So more than half of the competency set is non-technical in these systems of competence assurance that they're used in the airlines. And that those of us who sit behind the pilots are usually very glad to know that it's not just their technical skills are being trained and assessed, but these other factors that we know are major causes in accidents are also being addressed. Where else is this being used? So it comes in initially in aviation in probably 1980s, 90s. Other industries are a bit slower to come into this, but most of the more hazardous industries are involved in this now and have programs for dealing with this. And also their regulators are alert to this and look at what they're doing. So we can see the oil and gas industry. We tried to interest them in this after Piper Alpha. They weren't very interested. And then they had Deepwater Horizon. And then as we see the regulators start to look at this, and we begin to see this coming in, particularly for drilling to start with, but also used in aspects of production. The rail industry has done a lot of work on this and have some very high quality materials on their websites that you can access. And this is not just for train drivers, it's for track workers, remote teams working, which is probably more relevant to the kind of work we see in the wind industry. Construction is beginning to become interested. Engineering is beginning to become interested, well established in the merchant navy and other sectors, and it's used in healthcare. So as I mentioned, in the offshore oil and gas industry, this is the Chemical Safety Board investigation of Macondo, Deepwater Horizon, and pointing out to the industry there's now a need to bring this kind of training into the drilling well control sector. I mentioned the rail industry. This is the Rail Safety Standards Board, who are very influential, and they have, as I say, very good materials on their website about all the development work they've done in this, and also how do you bring this in? How do you implement it? How do you introduce this to your workforce when this is a new concept, which is obviously an important point. We've done work, quite a lot of work in recent years in healthcare, including with surgeons and anaesthetists and nurses in operating theatres. This is an example of a skill set that was developed by Scottish surgeons that's now being used internationally with surgeons. So we see other sectors who would like to have as few errors as possible, and again, as potential patients, that's of interest to us, bringing this in, training up faculty, doing the work to identify the skill set, and implementing this as part of their ongoing safety programs. And I'm not going through all this, but when we do the work with the practitioners, this is working with surgeons, asking surgeons. So you walk into an operating theatre or you're working with another surgeon, what does it look like if this surgeon is doing the gathering information bit of situation awareness well? What behaviours would reassure you this is a safe surgeon? What behaviours might you see that would concern you that the level of risk could be increasing during this procedure because the surgeon's not doing the right things to gather information? So that's just an example of that. Why train non-technical skills? It emphasises their importance. It raises self-awareness in the workforce of how their behaviour influences safety and efficiency, not just for them, but for their co-workers. It teaches them about the effects their behaviour has on other people, gives them the chance to change or amend these behaviours. It teaches new knowledge and skills as part of your safety management programme. For those involved in developing these systems, collecting the information, doing the task analysis, or reading the reports if you pay somebody else to do it, then you learn quite a lot about staff expertise, experiences, how things are being done normally on the job, because that's what we're wanting to learn from. The training provides a mechanism for discussing acceptable and unacceptable behaviours in relation to risk at the work site. And ultimately, the aim is probably to improve the safety culture so that the behaviours that are acceptable in the workplace are safer behaviours that are better for catching and stopping error and reducing the number of riskier behaviours that may be going on unchallenged at the present time. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of what are non-technical skills, and I'd be very happy to send anybody any more information. We've got lots and lots of papers and booklets and lots of things on this. So that's my email if anybody would like any more information. Thank you.